Dr. Lane.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm so glad to be here this morning. Together with me, we have some senior faculty, some College of Health Science, VinUni, as well as a leader, Ms. Tony and his team from the library, or here we call the Learning Resource Centers from VinUni. And as you know, the healthcare industry is crucial. We witnessed that in the last couple of years. Obviously, all of us suffers a lot due to COVID-19 worldwide. And evidence-based healthcare is certainly, needed a lot of, we actually work a lot on research and publications and communication to the public, to the peer communities of scientists and scholars. So we are so fortunate to be able to organize this series of, training session, I would call today's and 2 weeks from now. So then we can offer this to our faculty members, our staff and students, and not only the full-time pupil, but also we have a lot of adjunct affiliate faculty from outside who are collaborators from VinMec Healthcare System, from our public hospital, plays a role as our teaching, side teaching hospital for the students, both undergraduate and the graduate medical education program. And we even open this to our collaborators, students and staff. So we share this widely with a network of other public universities as well, with the hope that we open the door to also the students from outside of VinUni. So I would like to show some appreciations. Thanks so much to the ELSEVIER team and the VinUni library. And I wish you a successful session. Enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Lin. Okay, so maybe I'll start off. First and foremost, thank you so much, Prof. Lin, for the opening address. It is absolutely our honor to have you here with us today. Secondly, thank you so much, Mr. Tony, Ms. Tam. Thank you so much for helping us organize this workshop, to the entire library team. And most importantly, thank you to our audience for joining. We understand how busy you are and you're taking time on your Saturday, your personal time, family time, and you're here for this workshop today. So we really appreciate that you could join us today. I'm sorry, the interpretation function is not working. I will check that before the next workshop, but hopefully your team can help us translate this video later, or maybe add subtitles later if that is easier, but we will definitely fix that before the next workshop. My name is Natasha. I am the Customer Success Manager for ELSEVIER. So what that means is that I normally work with Ms. Tam and the library team to support you with workshops, trainings, activities, those kind of things. Today, we are here to talk about the Health Research and Publication Program. So as Prof. Lin mentioned, healthcare is a very, very important area, and it has become more important during COVID. So one of the most important things in healthcare is to publish research. And therefore, ELSEVIER supports our major accounts like VinUni on how you can help to improve the quality and volume of research publications in healthcare. So this program is very, very specific to healthcare research. Within the scope of healthcare, we do look at medicine, nursing, allied health, biomedical research, as well as clinical research. Today's session is more general, focusing on general medicine research. There are similar sessions. So as I discussed with Ms. Tam, we normally have like a top-down approach where we start with fundamentals of research, and then we do more specific sessions on manuscript writing, publication strategy, promotion strategy. So we have specific story like that. But it's okay. We can always start with the publication strategy session first, and then we can plan the other sessions maybe later this month or next month or something like that. So today we will basically talk about publication strategy. Let me start sharing my screen.
Natasha?
Yes.
Can I ask the question, do we have access to your slides through the
Yes.
our library?
Yes. So
Yeah.
those are some of the things that I wanted to share with you.
Yeah.
So firstly, to answer your questions, yes. Whatever we discussed today, the slides, the links, the additional resources, as well as this recording will be available to you. So we will send
Okay.
you all of this material after the meeting.
Yeah.
And then if there are any follow-up questions, you can always send us your questions via email as well.
Thank you.
So you will definitely have access to all these resources. To begin with, this is a discussion on strategy. So anything to do with strategy cannot be a one-way dialogue. It has to be a discussion. We would like to get your inputs as well. And so this is in a meeting format. Any of the participants can unmute themselves and give us their inputs, or we will be using this platform called Slido for your inputs. So for all of you who are joining this meeting today, you have two options. You can either go to slido.com. You can either go to slido.com and enter this event code, or you can just simply scan this QR code over here. So using this platform, we will be asking you questions during the workshop, and we hope that you will be able to answer. So let's start with a simple question, just to get people engaged and just to get people on Slido. So when you go to slido.com, you can put this event code or you scan this QR code, and you should be able to see the question on your screen. Let me just jump here. There. So somebody just said food. And as you can see, your responses are anonymous. So nobody is asking who gave what answer, who gave what input, but the important thing is for you to share. And I can see a lot of people are saying food. Somebody said food and people, family, culture, noodles. My favorite thing about Vietnam is nature. Every time I come to Vietnam, I find that there is just so much greenery, rivers, the landscape. I love the nature in Vietnam. So it's good to see that people, most people are saying food and culture in Vietnam. So clearly food and people is the answer of choice. I'll just wait to see how many more people join the Slido. As you can see right now, 14 people have responded. And to answer your previous question, even the discussion, the questions that we asked during the workshop, we will include those responses in the slides. So you can see some of the questions and how your team is also doing research. Yeah? So clearly Vietnamese food is a big thing, right? Even all over the world, Vietnamese food is so famous. The mountain, somebody said mountain also. Yeah, I like the nature and the landscape in Vietnam. I think it's a beautiful country. And especially your university is located in a very beautiful location. Okay, so let's move forward. We'll stop this question and let's open the workshop with another question. And now I would like to ask the audience on what are the challenges that you face in health research publication. So maybe as faculty or as student, when you are trying to publish your research, what challenges do you face? And you don't have to just say one word. You can give like short 3-4 words answer. Take your time, think about it. We want to hear from you. So language barrier, thank you. Language can be a challenge. We want to hear from you because then we will customize the workshop based on your challenges. Language, yes, language can be a big barrier. We know that some of the international journals, the most highly rated journals are all in English. And that is a challenge all over the world. There are other countries, like nowadays you find a lot of Spanish journals are also coming up. A lot of Portuguese journals have started improving their ranking. But there are very few Vietnamese journals who can compete with European journals. So indeed, language is a challenge. Lack of existing data, proper research methodology, equipment, lack of systematic data. So research method and finding the right journal. These are, to us, these are two separate issues. There's limited time, finding the journals that are interested in your topics. That is something which we will cover in today's workshop. Finding the right journal, again, appropriate writing. So appropriate writing is something that we cover in our manuscripts writing workshop. So we can plan that later. Difficult to achieve international standards of research. So when we say international standards, all of these things contribute, right? Access to equipment, access to resources, language barriers, all of that contributes to the standard of research that you can do. But from what I can see, I think a lot of people have very good English here. Quality of research and peer review. That's a very difficult question. Yes. So let me assure you, some of the challenges that you've mentioned over here, you are not unique. We work with many universities who face similar challenges, and our workshops are designed to address these specific challenges. So let's talk about what challenges we will cover in today's workshop. And I'll keep the poll open in case you want to put in more inputs, but let's jump into some of the challenges. So today's workshop is focusing on publication strategy. So when we say publication strategy, we will try to give you a framework on how you can publish, which means we will include things like what to publish, when, where, so how to identify the right journal, how to find the right collaborators, besides publishing in journals, how to promote your research. And we will also talk a little bit about how you can publish with Elsevier, some of the tools that Elsevier provides to improve the publication process for you. So we will be talking about all of these things today. We have 2 hours blocked for this session, but we started a little bit late. I will still try to finish on time, but we will also have maybe a short 2 to 5 minute break at 75 minutes, because I understand that people also need to break a little bit, right? Like a natural pause we will have. We will also have a Q&A session at the end, but if you have any urgent questions, you can put your urgent questions in the chat, or you can even put them in Slido, or you can just unmute yourself and talk, because like I said, this is a discussion on strategy. So you can just unmute yourself and talk. So let's talk about publication strategy. What is really publication strategy? So one of the challenges that journals face, the journal and the publisher. So you must understand that Elsevier is a publisher, and then there are journals. So Lancet is a journal, NEJM is a journal, the Cell is a journal, right? So for publisher and for journals, the biggest challenge is that we receive hundreds of manuscripts every day. So there's a lot of competition. And you can see that NEJM openly declares that from all the manuscripts that they receive, only 5% actually get published. So there's a lot of competition. And like I mentioned, some of the challenges that you face, you are not alone. Many researchers face similar challenges when it comes to publication, because out of all the research that you submit, only 5 to 10% actually gets published. And the research volume has increased tremendously. So in COVID, we saw that in the last 2 years, the volume of health research has really grown, not only on COVID, but other related areas also. So people are not just doing research on COVID related topics, they're also doing more research on chronic diseases, more research on population health, public health, genetics, biodiversity. So the volume of research has really grown. So as you can imagine, there are hundreds and hundreds of papers, manuscripts being submitted every day, and only a small percentage of those manuscripts will actually get published. So there's a lot of competition in terms of the volume. Then also in terms of the quality. So when we receive manuscripts, manuscripts can be of many types. We get original articles, review articles, case studies, letters to the editors, book reviews, editorials, and even some you can even give like journal specific content, like some journals specifically write patient case reports. So even those kind of specific content. So it's not only the volume, but also the diversity. So we get so many different types of manuscripts. And you as researchers have so many options on how you want to write your paper, right? So there is just so much competition that it is important for you to have a strategy and a plan. So the publication strategy is a roadmap for a researcher or a research organization like your university that determines how much, what, when, and who will be published. So the idea of this publication strategy and today's workshop is to give you a plan on how much to publish, what to publish, how to identify the right topic, the journal, and what is the right time to submit your manuscript. So our goal is to help you create a plan which is aligned with your career goals. So imagine there will be some researchers or some faculty members who have a goal of publishing at least 3 manuscripts in a year. That is quite ambitious. And then there are other researchers who or faculty who have other responsibilities as well. They have to publish only 1 paper in a year. So their goals are different. Similarly, students have different research goals, right? So it is important for you to create a strategy which is aligned with your career goals. At the same time, it should also align with the university's research goals. So every university has research goals. They want to research in specific areas, specific subjects. They want to publish in specific journals, or they want to focus on certain journals. So you have to align with the university research goals as well. So through this publication strategy, you will be able to create a plan that aligns your career goals with the university's career research goals. So generally, in a publication strategy, we find that researchers always create a publication strategy. And if you are not doing that now, I would encourage all researchers to think about creating your publication strategy, because by creating a publication strategy, it increases your chance of publication. It helps you to estimate how much time you require to actually get published. You can even plan your research better. So if you are working on multiple topics, you can imagine that some topics you will need to research for only 6 months. And then there are other topics, for example, topics which are related to more public health, community topics. They can require up to 18 months or maybe even 2 years. So if you have a plan, you will be able to plan your research more effectively. You will be able to improve the quality of your grant applications. And if you can improve the quality of your grant applications, you will be able to get more resources, hopefully. So I noticed some of you mentioned that one challenge is limited equipment, access to resources. That's where your grant applications are very important. If your applications are strong, and if you are able to identify the right partners and collaborators, you can actually get some of the resources which you don't have in your university. So you, as a researcher, you can put all of this in your grant application, which is a part of your publication strategy. From a university perspective, as I mentioned, it is useful to have a publication strategy for the university so that you can align your institution's goal with your research output. So for example, imagine if there was a hospital like a National Heart Institute. So as a National Heart Institute, you should be publishing maximum on cardiology and cardiothoracic related topics. But maybe your researchers are focusing more on asthma. That doesn't align with the institution's goal, right? So for the university or for the hospital, it's very important to have a institutional publication strategy so that you can make sure that your researchers are aligned with the university strategy and there is harmony between the different subject areas. So within University, you don't have only medicine, right? You have students from computer science, you have students from business. So you have to understand how to create that harmony between the different verticals in the education program and then optimize funding. So as a university, again, you have to think about what are the university priorities. If the university priority is to publish more in medicine research, then they need to divert more funding towards medicine research. So that's how the university can also use a publication strategy to optimize where it is spending the money. And then the third group that uses publication strategy very often are mainly the pharma companies. So a lot of students might eventually go into research for pharma companies. When you go into research for pharma companies, one of the most important aspect is to create research and marketing material which aligns with the time of their product being released to the market. So when they release the drug into the market, they want to make sure that the doctors have access to research that they can use. So that's why a lot of pharma companies create publication strategy so that they can optimize their research and marketing efforts with the drug development effort. So that is something which will be useful for students later in their career if they decide to pursue research, especially research at a pharma company. So these are the three different organizations which do publication strategy very often. Let me ask you all now. In your opinion, what do you think is included in a publication strategy? So let me go back here. So in your opinion, what do you think is important? Like a lot of you said, choosing the right journal. That is one aspect of publication strategy. But apart from choosing the right journal, what else do you think is important to think about when you are creating a publication strategy? And take your time, think about it, and I'll wait for some of you to answer. I can see 2 people are typing, so take your time. And like you said, many of you said choosing the right journal. Yes, indeed. Choosing the right journal comes under the question of where to publish. Then the other question is when. So somebody said timeline. Timeline is important. In the same workshop we did for another university about 2 weeks back, one of the faculty asked this question that do certain journals accept more manuscript at certain time of the year? On paper, no. On paper, they are supposed to have the same acceptance rate all the time. But in reality, that's true. For every journal, there will be like maybe some summer issue or some complementary issue or supplementary issue. So whenever they are creating that supplementary issue, or let's say if it's the Lancet Diabetes and it's around World Diabetes Day, then at that time they tend to accept more manuscript because they need to publish more at that time. So when you are looking at timeline, one of the things to consider is that when is the supplementary issue coming out? Funding, whether the research is unique, the Contents must be in line with the journal and must be very good. Good methods, right journal, good writing, finding all the related prior research, literature, new. Somebody in the chat said the research should be new. Reader targeting, that's interesting. That's a very interesting input. Yes, you have to be very careful of who your target audience is. That is also a question of choosing the right journal. Collaborators, identifying your collaborators. So some of the things that you've said over here, such as good methods, good quality of writing, that's subjective, right? Whether the paper is good or not, we are not discussing that in today's workshop. That is something which we generally discuss in the manuscript writing workshop. I see somebody raise their hand. Farm, you can actually unmute yourself and speak up if you would like to do that. Okay. So as I was saying, whether the quality of the manuscript is good or not, we will cover that in more detail in the manuscript workshop. But some of the other aspects that you've mentioned over here, timeline, right journal, funding, reader targeting, thesis, collaborators, all of this we will cover in today's session. So from an Elsevier perspective, let me go back here. From an Elsevier perspective, we look at a few elements of the publication strategy. The first one is what and when to publish. So when we say what and when, that includes things like content. So when we say content, in the content, you have to decide as a researcher whether you are writing an original article, a review article, a case report, a methods, a letter to the editor, or what is the content, as well as your topic. So your topic, your subject, all of that comes under the content part. Thank you, Mr. Tony. Yes, they can also put their questions in the chat. So all of that comes under the content part, and we will discuss this in a bit more detail in a minute. The second one is publication type. So as I mentioned, is it an original article? Is it a review article? Or what sort of output are you targeting? That will come under publication type. And the third one, as all of you mentioned, is timelines. So timelines is also a very important consideration, and we will discuss that in more detail. The second element to your publication strategy is with whom. So your collaborators, somebody just mentioned, who are the collaborators? So when we say collaborators, you can actually divide your collaborators as co-authors or your strategic partners. So you have to decide whether you are going to have co-authors or is it going to be an individual paper. If you are going to have co-authors, who will those people be? So you have to identify with whom to publish. And then finally, where to publish. Here we will talk about selecting the right journal. So these are all the points that we will cover in the workshop going forward. We will start briefly with what, when, and whom, and then we will spend maximum time on where to publish. So I'll pause here. I'll give you all a few minutes to think about all this information because we will have more discussion and we will come back in about 5 minutes. So it's 7 minutes past 10. We will restart the session at 12 minutes past 10. So we'll come back in 5 minutes. I just want to give you all some time to think about all these points and then we come back and discuss more. Yeah. Thank you. We'll just take a quick pause, Ms. Tam.
Yes,
We'll take a quick pause so the audience can take like a short break and they can think about these points. And then we will come back in 5 minutes and discuss more. Yeah.
Okay, thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you. Okay, so we are back now. I hope you had a time to just take a short break and think about these aspects, elements of a publication strategy. We will now discuss each element in detail. So let's start with what and when to publish. I will come back to this sample output in a minute, but let's start with what and when to publish. So very often we get this challenge. A lot of, especially when researchers and faculty are working with students, we get this challenge where the student comes to the researcher or the faculty and says, I've already written my data, my paper. Now, how do I adjust my data? And some of you mentioned at the beginning of this session that one challenge for you is getting the right data set. So a lot of times what we find is that the researcher has already decided what the outcome should be, what the conclusion of the research should be, or what the result of the research should be. And instead of writing the paper based on actual data, they are actually writing the paper based on the result that they wanted to achieve. And that is so bad, right? Then what do? Shouldn't you be writing your paper based on the data? That's where we go wrong. That's where we go wrong in content. That is why the content aspect is so important. In today's session, we'll spend only a few minutes on that. But in the manuscript writing session, we spend a lot of time on the content. But today we will only give you a brief overview on what is important in the content. The first thing is that you must stay true to your original proposal. So that's where this comes in. So this is a kind of like a sample proposal. I know some of the researchers, you do very detailed grant application or you do very detailed research proposal. When you are doing your research proposal, you have to provide all the details, but in addition to your research proposal, it would help if you have this type of summary as well. So for every researcher, think about the topics that you want to work on, the publication type, so original article, review article, or case report. By when do you plan to complete it or publish it? Who will your co-authors be? And who will your target journals be? And then if you want to add any more additional information. So in addition to your detailed research proposal, we advise that you create this type of document as well, like a summary of your research proposal, so that when you finish your research, you can go back and ask yourself, have I achieved the topic and the objective that I listed when I started my research? So you need to stay true to your original proposal, because if you are not true to your original proposal, if you divert from your original proposal, your research will fail during peer review. Even if it passes peer review, the journal editor will immediately know that your objective and your final research are not aligned. So make sure you are honest and original about the content that you write. That is the most important thing. Do not deviate. So for example, let's say you do a research on some efficiency of some drug, and at the end of the research, you find that the drug is not useful. That's okay. It's okay to state that the product has no benefits. Or it's okay to state that the drug is not efficient at all, or it's not solving the disease or the problem that it was supposed. It's okay to have a negative output, but do not manipulate the data. Do not change your research in the middle of the project. Stay true to your original proposal, because if you don't, your research will fail during peer review. Even if it passes peer review, the editor will surely know that you have tried to either manipulate the data or change the results. So definitely that is the most important thing. The other thing, be very careful of compliance. This is where the peer review comes in. Make sure that your research is entirely compliant. So if you have any external funding agency, make sure you are compliant with them. If you are using any external data sources, list your data sources. If you're doing animal research, for example, and you needed to get some extra permissions or approvals for animal models or animal subjects, make sure you have all of those documentation in place. The journal may or may not check all this documentation. Sometimes they check, sometimes they don't check. But for your site, it is best that you keep all your approvals and your compliance in place. Avoid under-reporting and also over-reporting. So what that means is, sometimes when we do research, we have a lot of data, and then the researcher, they tend to show only that data which gives them a good result. That's not the right practice. You must show all the data. So if there is some data which is giving you confounding results, or if there is some data that is giving you negative result, report that as well. And that can be reported as a limitation, or it can be reported in the discussion section. But definitely report all the data and outcomes from your research. Do not under-report. Avoid duplication of your research. So for example, we find there's a very fine line. Sometimes you might be replicating a research from another peer, or you might be replicating a research that has been done in another country. That's not duplication. But if you are literally just duplicating the research of another peer and there is no new information coming out of your research, that's not useful. Whenever you do research, some new information has to come out. Even in the manuscript that you write, do not duplicate your findings. Find whatever is new in your research, you must state that. So don't have any duplication in the content. So these are some bullet points that are very important to make sure that your content is good quality. So there's a comment in the chat. We also have to state if the research has received any ethics approval, exactly, and from where. Many journals will not accept your paper if you don't declare this, exactly. So all of the ethics approvals, any kind of funding approval, you must keep your documentation ready. You must submit it when you submit your manuscript. The journal may or may not check it in detail, but you should at least submit it at your end. So thank you for putting that bullet point in. Thank you so much. So this is a high level overview of what are the most important things to make sure in your content. As I mentioned, we have a detailed workshop on manuscript writing that goes into the details of each of these bullet points, and we can discuss that separately. The second big question is about timelines. So when should be published? It is always good to have a medium-term plan of research. What that means is that you need to have a 6 to 18-month research plan. Our analysis shows that generally it takes 6 to 12 months for researchers to get published. And yes, indeed, in countries like Indonesia, Vietnam, it can, on average, it can take 12 months to get published. So it makes sense for us. 12 to 18 months is a medium-term plan. So we always advise researchers to have a 6 to 18-month research plan. The research plan is the sample that I showed earlier. What are the topics that you will work on? What are the journals you will target? And who will be your collaborators? So you must have a medium-term research plan. It doesn't help to have a long-term research plan also, because research changes very fast, and your topic, your focus areas can change very fast. So we don't advise having a 5-year research plan, not even for the university, because the topics, the quality, the access to resources can change very fast. So we always advise having a medium-term research plan, which ranges from 6 to 18 months. So as a thumb rule, we try to have 4 publications at the end of 6 years. So just bear this in mind. As I mentioned, what are your career goals? For some researchers, the career goals will be very aggressive. They must have 2 to 3 publications in a year. That is very aggressive. For other researchers, they will target having 1 publication in a year. That is okay. Generally, on average, we find in Asia, generally people try to put out 4 publications in 6 years. So if you are able to achieve 4 publications in 6 years, you are already at the top of the bell curve. If you want to be really successful, you can have 6 publications in 6 years. But if you want to be at the median, you can have 4 publications in 6 years. So that is the kind of timeline you need to have in your research plan, that how can what topics and what type, so that you can have a mix of original articles and case reports, but make sure you try to get at least 4 publications in 6 years. So like I said, what that means is that if you're doing 4 publications in 6 years, you may have some parallel projects. So you can have 1 original research that you are conducting. And then in addition to 1 original research, because VinUni is attached to hospitals, there are attendees over here who are also working on hospitals. So maybe in addition to 1 original article, you can also have 2 to 3 case reports that you are working on in parallel. So you can have these parallel projects. From a publication standpoint, on average, when you submit your paper, publication approximately takes 100 days. So there is research on PubMed. I'm sure you're all familiar with PubMed. In case you're not familiar with PubMed, just raise your hand or put it in the chat and I will show you what PubMed is. But those of you who are familiar with PubMed, they will know that generally from a publication standpoint, it takes 100 days on average for a paper to get published. There are some journals who take longer, but there are very few, but some journals can take longer. On average, once you submit your manuscript, all the way from review to acceptance to publication, on average, it takes 100 days. So build this into your research timeline. When you are looking at this model, let's go back here. Here, when you say proposed date, build that 100 days into this proposed date. So be mindful. If you want to publish by December, that means you need to submit your manuscript by October. So plan it like that. Yeah. Then the question arises, what happens if you publish too late? Let's say you are working on a research, but you want to make sure that your quality of manuscript is perfect. You want to make sure your results are absolutely thorough. There is no error. And initially, or maybe the peer review is taking longer than you imagined. So maybe you initially thought that you want to publish in October, but now it's already January of 2023. So it's already too late. Why is that a bad thing? It's a bad thing because of 2 reasons. Number 1, it's called periodic relevance of research. What that means is that depending on your subject and your topic, your research is only relevant for a certain period of time. So for example, if you are doing research in AI, artificial intelligence, that is an area where research is changing so fast that if you delay your publication by just 3 months, you are already too late. The research has already moved past you. You are already too late. Your topic will not be relevant anymore. That's for artificial intelligence as an example. In comparison, if you are doing research on, say, population health, or if you're doing some kind of research on a community health project, those research take time and the findings take time. And also the changes in that industry are very slow. So there, if you delay your research by 6 months, it may not have such a bad impact. But anything longer than 6 months is already too late. So one is the issue of periodic relevance. Second, of course, the issue is that what if some other research beats you to it? Somebody else finds an interesting topic or starts working on a similar topic and they publish before you. That's also a threat. So a lot of researchers, they try to do perfection. They try to be perfect when they're submitting their manuscript. Be careful of that. Be careful of falling into that trap, because if you spend too much time and you get delayed in publishing, even that is risky. Oh, thank you, Mr. Tony, for putting the link to PubMed. So this is all about timelines. If anybody has any questions or any comments on this portion about timelines, you can either unmute yourself or you can put your comments in the chat. And while you all think about this, I'll move to the next section. But if you have any comments on the timelines, you can always put it in the chat or you can unmute yourself. Now, the next component of the publication strategy is with whom to publish, your co-authors. So a lot of times you will find that as a researcher, you can publish with only VinUni, or you can identify partner organizations, or you can collaborate with authors from outside VinUni, from other hospitals, from other universities, or even from outside Vietnam. So how do you identify, how do you decide who should your co-authors be? I'll give you a quick snapshot of what Vietnam as a country is doing at the moment. But before that, let's hear from you all. Why do you think we need collaborators? So let me open this poll here. And as I mentioned, as a researcher, you can have an individual research paper. There can be a research paper where the only author is Miss Tam. That's fine. But a lot of times, people have collaborators. The collaborators could be coming from the same university, or they come from other universities or other institutions. Why do you think we need collaborators? So somebody said faster. Do you want to elaborate on what do you mean by faster? Do you mean that faster to get published? Somebody said to leverage multiple connections and expertise. Yes. What else? To share expertise. It's more fun in a team. That's true. Research can be quite boring, I understand. It's always useful to have somebody to share the burden, compensate each other for weakness, excellence, important roles in your research. It's actually very important to identify every person's role in the research. There can be a lead researcher, and then there can be authors, and then there can be executors, peer reviewers. So it's important to define roles. When you work with others who play an important role, any other excellence together. So I see a lot of you are focusing on the fact that by having collaborators, you can share expertise and you can leverage the excellence. So for example, in VinUni, you can have excellence in education, excellence in teaching, excellence in learning, supporting students. You might want to collaborate with a hospital which has excellence in patient care. So as a researcher, you can collaborate with clinicians in a hospital. Not only will that give you access to their excellence and expertise, it can also give you access to resources. So a lot of collaboration happens for resources. I see some comments in the chat. What if someone who don't have a true role but wanted to be a co-author, example, your boss? Very important question. That is something which we will cover in the next few slides. It's an important question of inappropriate authorship. So we will definitely come to that. Somebody also said that it's more fun in conducting boring research if you work in a team. Yes. A lot of people agree that sometimes there are people who just want to be an author because they have supported the research, and that's a big problem in our part of the world, right? So maybe let's address that first. The challenge that you are all talking about is what we call inappropriate authorship. So in inappropriate authorship, we have different types, and you have to be careful of those. The first one is contribution disclosure. So what was the contribution of your boss? That's a big question. The bigger challenge is that a lot of times we don't even question it, especially as a young researcher. Your boss just tells you to put his or her name on the paper. Sometimes the boss even tells you to put his or her name as the lead author. And we don't have the knowledge or the experience, and we don't even question it. And that's a huge problem. Unfortunately, it is a problem that the journal or the publisher cannot help you with, right? The journal or the publisher will not know what the role of your boss was in your research. That is a call that you need to take with your peer reviewers. So when you have a peer review meeting or a peer review committee meeting, and there if you get questioned that what was the person's role in the research, and you are not able to answer that, then your paper will get rejected. Or if you have any concerns, your boss tells you to put the name down, you don't want to put the name down, then you need to raise that with the peer review committee. I hope that Win University has access to such peer review committees who can stop these kind of practices, because these are practices that the journals or the publishers cannot control. We don't know who the authors are, right? We trust you to tell us. It is the role of the peer review committee to be honest and to be practical as to who all should be named in a paper. Does that make sense? There's a
Yes,
question.
yeah. Yes, it does, Natasha.
Thank you. There's also a question in the chat. Does it make a difference if you are the first or second or third author? Yes, it does. It is a matter of prestige to be the first author. Generally, we put the person as the first author who's the lead researcher on the project. So in a project, maybe you have 5 people in your project. There can be a lead researcher, there can be a project manager, and then there can be 2 to 3 people who are actually executing the research. So the the lead researcher, the person who came up with the idea of the research, the person who wrote the research proposal, the person who made sure that the quality of your research outcomes is strong and your discussion in the research is strong and you have some new knowledge, that person should be listed as the first author. And it is a matter of prestige. It gives you a lot of credibility to be the first author. So it's a very important thing if you get to be the first author. If you are just the person executing the research, so for example, you're all working with students, the students will be running your PCR cycles every day. But the person who writes the full manuscript and the person who submitted the grant proposal will probably not be the person who's running the PCR cycles. So that is the person who should be the first author, not the person who's just executing the research and collecting results. So it does make a lot of difference on whether you're the first or the second or the third author, because it shows your contribution in the research. There's another important person involved. So in addition to designating the first author, a lot of journals now require you to also designate the author of contact. So if anybody has questions about your research, or if somebody wants to replicate your research, or if they want to partner with you, then who should they contact? That's the contact author. Even that person has a very important role to play, because that is the person who can think long term on what do I want to do next? What do I want to do after my research? Do I want to collaborate? Do I want to expand? So that is also an important person. So two people who are very important from a publishing perspective, the first author and the contact author. They can be the same person or they can be different people also, not a problem. But just think of it this way, that who will you reach out to if you had questions about the research, or if you wanted to collaborate with the researchers? Who should be the contact point? So that contact author is also very important. The corresponding author, Ms. Tam, the contact author or the corresponding author is the same. That's what we mean. So there are some comments here. The last author is also important. Yes, not to say that any of the authors are not important. All authors are very important indeed. It's just, like I said, it's a matter of prestige to be the first author on the paper, because that shows that you are the one whose brainchild the research was. The other issue is that although you are intellectually contributing in the research project, the first author who is responsible in leading the writing does not publish your name on it. Reason he or she writes it, this is immoral to me. I agree. I completely agree. So as a research team, it is very important, like I said earlier, as a research team, it's very important for everybody to define their roles. Just because a project manager or a researcher is writing the manuscript and they don't put your name down, that is totally immoral. I completely agree. You have to, even if, so let's say there can be a situation where a very senior person conceptualized the research. So they identified the topic and they gave a high level framework. And then the rest of the team created the detailed research methodology, executed the experiments, collected the data, wrote the manuscript. So let's say in that situation, the person who conceptualized the research acted more like a mentor. Even if you act as a mentor, you should at least be acknowledged. Maybe you are not stated as an author, but you are acknowledged as one of the reviewers or acknowledged as a person in the paper. So your acknowledgement can still be there at the bare minimum. But if you've done more than that, if you've acted more than a mentor, you've actually been involved in research methodology, you have been involved in maintaining data quality, you've been guiding your researchers on how to write the manuscript, then undoubtedly your name should be there on the paper. There is no doubt about it. I completely agree that if this person's name is not there on the paper, it is immoral. So I am in agreement with you.
Yeah, it does happen, Natasha.
So the challenge is that these are things that the journals wouldn't know, right?
No. We have to dispute ourselves. Yeah.
Exactly. This is where your dispute committee or your peer review committee comes in. Easiest would be that when you start working with your research team, you discuss these roles and responsibilities at the beginning of your research.
Yeah.
Exactly. But if you've not had that discussion, or if there is some doubt or dispute at the end of the paper, then that's where the peer review committee or the dispute committee should come in. Ideally, not the dispute committee. The peer review committee should be able to give you that guidance. Anything you want to add on that?
You're asking me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I mean, I did the experience this before. Even the the project that I got the money, I did everything, but then I had to go on leave for a while. But at the same time, when anything happened, I took part. But when it comes to writing the first draft, they did not put my name on it. So I had to dispute. And I, argue about this intellectual contribution, blah, 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 blah. In the end, they add my name on it, but not as the first or the second or the third author, but later on. So even that, it is not satisfactory, but at least they put my name on it. Yeah.
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 I agree. At least they put your name on it. That's
Yeah.
the most important thing. In fact, so I originally come from India. In India,
Mm.
this is a huge challenge where
Yeah.
a lot of people, their PhD thesis, they don't get to put their name on it. And
No.
their PhD gets delayed by 10 years, 15 years,
Yeah.
because their faculty doesn't let them put their name on it.
Oh, that's bad. Yeah.
It's horrible. It's horrible. There are so many cases of suicide in India amongst PhD candidates because they just get so frustrated with the research culture that
Oh,
they give up. So that's a big problem in some of our markets.
yeah. Oh dear.
So I understand your pain. I understand your frustration. I would say,
Mm.
look at the bright side. At least you were able to dispute and get your
Yeah.
put there. There
Yeah.
are so many who don't even get that opportunity.
No, no, no.
But
Thank you.
thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing. So these are some challenges which we call inappropriate authorship. In addition to these contribution disclosures, which we just talked about, there is also the challenge of gender bias. You will find that even today, we all talk about women empowerment, women enhancement, but even today, the contribution of women in research is much lower. The number of male authors in published research in medicine is still higher. So there is still a lot of gender bias in published research. There's also a challenge of fake peer reviews. I don't know if you've heard of this, but I found this shocking. In some countries like China and Korea and India, people set up fake peer review committees just so that their paper can go through peer review fast and be submitted to the journal. Even journals set up fake peer review committees who just accept the paper. Sometimes they even accept money, and they don't even review the research thoroughly. They just accept the money and they go into publication very fast. The bad thing about this is that the number of retractions that then happen is very, very high, and it is so insulting to have your paper published and then retracted. That is the biggest insult for a researcher. But if you use these fake peer review committees, you run the risk of a very strong retraction. So be careful of these things. You need to also be careful of predatory journals. I have that somewhere here. Let me come here directly. You also have this challenge of predatory journals. As researchers, especially experienced researchers, you will very often get emails from some journal offering to publish your research. So they may say that give us $500 or give us $200 and we will publish your research. You have to be very careful of these predatory journals. The best thing to do is to check the journal's business model. How is the journal making money? Are they charging subscription fee or are they charging publication fee? And based on that, you can take a call. If you are not sure whether the journal you are working with, if you are not sure whether it's a predatory journal or not, you can write to us at Elsevier and we will check with our legal team and advise you on whether the journal that has contacted you is a predatory journal or not. So there are a lot of these issues that you as researchers need to be careful of before you submit your manuscript. And Mr. Tony has shared a very useful link on a list of predatory journals. So thank you, Mr. Tony. Thank you so much for sharing that. Coming back to the point of collaborations, there was something that I wanted to share here. Yeah, I'm sure experienced researchers get so many emails every day. We have to be very careful. Experienced researchers like yourself will be able to identify predatory journals, but a lot of times young researchers or young students are not able to, and they get trapped. They fall trapped to these predatory journals and fake peer review committees. So we have to guide them. So coming back to the question about collaborations, I just wanted to show you some data about medicine research in Vietnam. So between 2019 and 2021, there were almost more than 5,300 research articles written in Vietnam on medicine. So this number so this data was collected on 2nd September. The data updates almost every day. So at the moment, this is 5369. So 5369 papers were published, all sorts of papers. So this includes original research, review articles, conference papers, all sorts of publications, over 5,300 publications in Vietnam between 2019 and 2021. Out of those 5,300, you can see 73% were international collaborations. That means that 73% of the papers had a Vietnamese entity like a university or a hospital collaborating with an international organization like an international university or an international hospital. Only 15% were collaborating within their country. So you can see that there is a lot of dependence, but in a good way. There's a lot of collaboration between Vietnamese institutions and international universities and hospitals. Only institution, that's 9.8%. So this means that in that paper, only one institution was listed. So if you're looking at VinUni, you published a paper with only authors from VinUni. That was only 9.8%. So this data basically shows you how important collaborations are for research in Vietnam. Through collaborations, you're able to get access to experts, you're able to get access to even resources. A lot of these international collaborations could be happening because the laboratories or the equipment is better in other countries or in your partner organizations, right? So you can get access to a lot of resources through collaborations as well. Another point to note over here is the academic and non-academic collaborations. So in a lot of countries like in Singapore, in Malaysia, the academic corporate collaborations is very high. That means that a lot of universities partner with pharma companies and med device companies to publish research. Again, that's a very useful way for them to get funding as well as access to equipment. So in other countries, you'll find that a lot of universities partner with pharma and med device companies, or even not universities. Like, for example, in Malaysia, we have research organizations which are owned by the ministry, but those research organizations actually help identify pharma companies who can come and do research with them. So even the government pushes to include pharma and medtech in research. So a lot of research happens through collaboration between academic and corporate, something which is not happening a lot in Vietnam. Something for you to consider, that can we leverage on the industry to support our research a little bit more? Something to think about. Does this data make sense to you? Any comments on this? Okay, so this was about collaborations. We've talked about collaborations and we talked about inappropriate authorship. And then we briefly talked about predatory journals. But the big issue for today is to identify the right journals, right? Where to publish. The big question is, how do you identify the right journal? So let's move into this discussion now. And again, I would like to ask you on what criteria do you look for when you are trying to identify the right journal? So let me open this poll. And again, take your time, think about it. And we want to hear from you on what criteria do you look for when you're trying to identify the right journal. And we're going to be spending some time on this topic. So let's hear from you. Clearly, impact factor, that's a big one. We always look at the journal impact factor. We will also be touching on challenges like language barrier, whether to publish in a European journal or a Vietnamese journal. So we will talk about all those things. Another point is that the journal publishes my area of topic. Excellent. That's a very important criteria. There has to be alignment of topic and the type of research. Mentor has published there. Yes, that's an important qualitative factor. In fact, in one of the workshops, there was a question from the audience that, is it correct to prioritize a journal where our mentor has published or where our university is publishing? So we will address that question in the session today. Methodology. Can you elaborate a little bit more about what you mean by methodology? Quality of articles published.
I have to speak, Natasha. Can't print. Sorry, can't type quickly enough. You know, like there are lots of maybe just my area. I do qualitative research, yeah, and so some journals, even say for example, I do a piece of qualitative research on HIV and women. And there are many journals that publish HIV stuff, for example, AIDS care and so on. And sometimes when you submit your paper, which is based on a qualitative inquiries, they said, no, this is not strong enough. So they use that positivism, they use that quantitative ways to judge my paper. So they reject my paper. That's just one example. Yeah.
Understand. I understand now. So what I'm hearing is that the methodology of your research has to be aligned with the journal guidance.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes.
Although the topic is right within their aims.
Correct.
Yeah.
The topic may align, but then there are some journals who have a very rigorous criteria and they only publish original research. Or there are some journals who only publish quantitative research.
Yeah.
So you don't want to target those, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely fair point. Aim and scope of the journal, indeed. And a lot of times we find that experienced researchers know this. As you mentioned, the methodology has to align with the journal requirements, or the journal aim and scope have to align with our topics. So this is information that experienced researchers have. Young researchers or students who are just starting in research don't have this knowledge. It's very important for us to educate them about these topics actively. So somebody said word limit, publishes research, quality of articles published. So I see that there are a lot of criteria that you are all mentioning here. Prestigious journals. Think of it this way. The way I personally, this is not Elsevier opinion, this is my personal opinion. When you're looking at quality of articles, when you're looking at prestigious journals, this is a qualitative way. Prestigious is a qualitative word. Quality of article is a qualitative phrase. The way to numerically compare journals is impact factor. And that's why you see on the screen that impact factor is the biggest. So basically, this is a word cloud. The biggest word is what everybody, maximum number of people are putting in. So that's why you all agree that impact factor is important. So personally, I agree with you as well. But there are so many other criteria. So from a publisher perspective, from Elsevier's perspective, there are a lot of other criteria that you should consider when identifying your journal. So again, I'll leave this poll open, but let me share from a publisher perspective some of the criteria to think about. So you can divide the criteria into quantitative and qualitative. You will notice that at the bottom of every slide, there are some additional links. Some of these links are coming from Clinical Key Physician, which you have access to, and some of the other links are coming from free resources. So I would strongly encourage that you read these links, especially in this section about identifying the right journals. But coming back to the point, to identify the right journal, you can divide your criteria into qualitative and quantitative. So when we talk about quantitative criteria, we talk about all of these metrics. Impact factor is one of the metrics, but there are actually so many others that will help you narrow down your search for your journal. So let's discuss these metrics a little bit. What are journal metrics? Journal metrics basically help you compare different journals. So a lot of you said quality of articles, quality of the journal, prestige of the journal. It's like saying which is a better tourist destination, Vietnam or Cambodia? How do you decide? You need some qualitative metrics to be able to compare the journals. You need quantitative metrics to be able to compare Cambodia versus Vietnam, right? So that's where journal metrics come in. So some useful journal metrics to consider are, first of all, journal impact factor, as you all mentioned. Journal impact factor is the most important metric. Most people base their search for the right journal based on the impact factor. For those who are new to research, impact factor, this is what it is. It is the number of citations in the current journal citation report that's given at the bottom over here. So this is a database. It's basically a database of all abstracts. So it's a very large database of research. So the number of citations in the current JCR year to items published in the previous 2 years divided by the total number of scholarly items published in the same period. So if you are looking at a period from say 2019 to 2021, you are looking at the number of citations for a particular journal in those 2 years divided by all the items that are published in those 2 years. So it's a little complicated to understand. Nobody will ask you to do calculations on it, but you should just know what impact factor is. I'll tell you where to find it. But first of all, let me also talk about another important metric, which is site score. So again, at the bottom, you can see the site score methodology as well as the journal citation reports database links. These two, impact factor and site score, are the most famous metrics to compare journals. As you all know, impact factor is obviously the top one, but in some countries, site score is also used. So in some countries, the researchers look at both impact factor and site score. There's a comment in the chat. Okay, so there's a question. Before we go further, can you explain from a publisher's viewpoint what you mean when you say right journal? Are we talking about selecting a journal with the highest probability of accepting your paper or anything else? We are not talking about the highest probability of accepting your paper. When we publishers say right journal, we mean what are the journals that you should target. So what we always advise is that when you are designing your grant application or when you're creating that template, which I showed in the beginning, at that point itself, as a researcher or a research team, we advise you to identify at least 3 to 5 target journals where you think you would want to publish. That is the right journal. Now, how to identify those target 3 to 5 journals? That's what we are talking about now. Identifying those 3 to 5 right journals or target journals will be based on quantitative metrics like the ones you see over here, or the qualitative metrics, which we will talk about in the next slides. So that's what we mean by right journal. We advise researchers to identify 3 to 5 target journals at the beginning of your research. And again, we'll cover a little bit in the qualitative metrics section, but some of the important things to think about is that when you're identifying those 3 to 5 journals, make sure you look at their author guidelines. So every journal homepage has author guidelines. That's where you will get a sense of, for example, what ma'am was saying earlier. Does the journal accept qualitative research? Does the journal accept case reports? Those kind of questions will get answered in the author guidelines. So do that homework at the beginning of your research, where you identify 3 to 5 target journals based on all the criteria that I will share with you now. And like I mentioned, personally for me, the most important criteria is impact factor. That's my personal choice. But from an Elsevier perspective, there are many factors: the impact factor, the site score. So just to quickly say over here, the H5 index is also a useful metric that you can use. Now, a lot of you have access to Scopus. Ms. Tam, you have access to Scopus, right?
Yes.
Great. So you don't have to calculate these metrics yourself. For those researchers who have access to Scopus, you can actually find these metrics in Scopus. So in Scopus, you can find the impact factor as well as the site score rank and the H5 index. Similarly, the other journal metrics are these: CMAGO and SNP. So again, coming to your question about what is the right journal. Healthcare or medicine is a very broad area. Within medicine, there are so many smaller areas. As a researcher, do you want to publish a broad research, or are you publishing in a very niche topic? So if you're publishing on a very niche topic, like let's say if you're publishing on cancer or even genetics, that is considered a niche topic. So if you are publishing in a very niche topic, you may not want to look at impact factor. You may want to look at CMAGO or SNP, because these give you a comparison of journals based on a very niche topic or a very niche subject area. So some journals can have a very low impact factor, but they may have a very high SNP metric. So as I was saying, the journal may have a low impact factor, but they have a very high SNP number in area of cancer research. That could be your target journal. Just because a journal has low impact factor doesn't mean it can't be your target journal. It can still be your target journal if they are publishing in your area of research. In addition to looking at broad metrics like impact factor and site score, some of you who are working in niche research areas may also want to look at metrics like SNP and SJR to help identify your target journals. Does that address the earlier question of what do we define as right journal? I just want to check before we move forward. Okay. In the interest of time, I'll move forward, but do let me know if I've not answered your question sufficiently. But so again, coming to this, as I mentioned, you can have, in this case, you can see for Lancet, the site score is 91.5, but the SNP score is 23. So this is how the specialized metrics also matter when you're trying to identify the journal. And thank you again, Mr. Tony. He's put the link to Scopus in the chat. You can actually see all these metrics for the journals that you want to target in Scopus. So you can actually compare journals quantitatively. Then in addition to the quantitative metrics, as I mentioned, and as all of you mentioned in the poll, there are qualitative metrics also. So some of you may want to publish in journals you are most familiar with, or as somebody said, you want to publish in a journal where your mentor has published. It might feel like you're being qualitative, but actually, if you think about it, especially for experienced researchers, there are certain journals where you are most familiar because those journals are focusing on the topics that you are interested in. So again, taking the example of oncology, if you are focusing on oncology research, chances are that you read oncology journals very often. So that's why you are most familiar with oncology journals. And that's why you have a tendency, you have a bias to focus on journals you are most familiar with. So if somebody is focusing on journals that they are familiar with, or if they're focusing on journals where they have published in the past, or their mentors have published in the past, that's not a bad thing. That's happening because subconsciously you know that those are the journals that align with your topic of research. Similarly, it's quite likely that those are the journals where most of your literature review is also coming from. So if your literature review is coming from 3 to 5 major journals, there's no harm targeting those major journals, because clearly those are the journals where the topic and the research area, research methodology aligns with what you have been researching on, right? So it's not a bad thing to focus on journals that you are familiar with, or focus on journals where you have published, or your mentor has published in the past. That's not a bad thing. You can obviously do that. You can read more about this at the link at the bottom. Other qualitative metrics can also be, like I said, journals where your peers or your fellow researchers have published. No harm looking at those as well. This was mentioned in the poll, the journal scope and content. This is where the author guidelines are so important. Whenever you are identifying the journal, and we'll come to this in a little bit more detail in the next section, on every journal homepage, there is a little folder called author guidelines. The author guidelines give you very detailed instructions on journal scope and content, as well as detailed instructions on the writing format, spacing, word limit, format for the pictures, format for the references, everything. So the author guideline has all of that information. We strongly advise that you read the author guidelines in detail while selecting your target journals. It is also useful to select journals which have similar author guidelines, especially when it comes to formatting. So that, let's say you submit your paper to one journal, that journal rejects it. Now you want to submit it to another journal, you shouldn't need to make too many changes to the formatting or the word limit and things like that. So those are things which you can control, right? Whether you want single space, double space, single column, double column, those are things which you can control very easily. So that's why we recommend that when you are identifying your target journals at the beginning of your research, try to find target journals that have similar author guidelines, especially about the formatting and presentation of your research. Because if the formatting and presentation of your research is similar, then it will be very easy for you to move to another journal if one journal rejects your paper. So definitely look at the author guidelines to identify the scope and content, as well as the other portions. The other question was journal audience. So some of you mentioned target audience in the poll. We get this question a lot. So I tend to take Singapore as an example. In Singapore, majority of the researchers prefer to publish in Singaporean journals, even though Singaporean journals don't have a very high impact factor, they don't have a very high journal metric. Still, Singaporean researchers prefer to publish in Singaporean journals because their target audience is the Singapore community. So a lot of the researchers in Singapore have this mindset. Their mindset is that they are doing research to advance healthcare in Singapore. So they don't care that they publish in an American journal or a European journal. They prefer to publish in a Singaporean journal because they want the target audience to be Singaporean. So similarly, identifying your journal audience is very important. This is very important from a university perspective also. A lot of public universities in most countries encourage you to publish in your local journal. So every country has a medical association, right? Like in Malaysia, we have the MMA, Malaysian Medical Association. They all have a journal. a lot of public universities encourage you to publish in that medical association journal, because it means that you are creating research for your country, not for other populations. So from a university standpoint also, this metric, this bullet point is very important, that are you targeting the local audience or are you targeting some other country? Are you targeting Hong Kong or India or US? What's your target audience? Then based on that, the university should identify its target journals, and the researchers should therefore identify the target journals based on this. That are you producing research for Vietnam or are you producing research for some other population? So this is another important question which comes up very often. Any comments on these qualitative metrics? Are these metrics that you have been using, or do you think these are useful and you will use going forward? Okay, so these are useful. Thank you. Some institutions do not value local journals. So yes, it depends on the university strategy. I understand most private universities, most private institutions don't value local journals. They prefer to publish abroad for many reasons. University ranking, access to resources, access to faculty, researchers, a lot of reasons can be there. So yes, if your university prefers for you to publish in international journals, then you don't have a choice. You should have similar goals. You don't have a choice in that. But like I said, there can be some institutions who do prefer to publish for local audience. And if that's your goal as a researcher, you feel very strongly that I want to focus on the local market, then maybe you need to affiliate yourself to those institutions. So that's a call that a researcher has to take, right? That am I at the right institution that matches my career aspirations or not? So something to think about. But generally we find that private institutions, private universities tend to prefer international journals. For local institutions, there are some public hospitals who prefer local journals, whereas some public hospitals also prefer international journals, because again, they want to benchmark themselves, they want to improve their ranking. So there can be so many reasons why institutions prefer international journals. It's a discussion which you need to have with your research office. So I'm cautious of time, and that's why I'll directly move into this section on how to publish with Elsevier. I'll leave these slides with you to go through them. And if we have time later, we can come back to some of those points. But I just want to also share a little bit about the Elsevier publishing process. So there's a question on addressing the cost of publication. It appears to me that academic publishing has changed a lot now. Even open access journals require research to pay a fee to publish. Is this trend will create research rich and poor? So we actually have a slide on open access. Let me go to that and share a little bit more on this. So first of all, what is open access? In publishing, there are two business models that are most frequent. Those two models are that either the journal is very expensive subscription. So what that means is, let's say the Lancet. If you were to purchase the Lancet as an individual, not through VinUni, but as an individual, if you wanted to purchase only the Lancet, so 1 year, 12 issues of just the Lancet will cost you upwards of $5,000 US. So basically, the journal is charging the reader. The journal is collecting monthly subscription fee from the reader. That is one way that the journal can make money. The other method that the journal can make money is that they have a very low or almost free subscription fee. So they don't charge the reader, but they charge the author for publishing, or they charge a minimal fee to the author for publishing. That's called open access. Now, even in open access, as you can see over here, there is gold open access and green open access. So it depends on how much the publisher or the journal is spending on maintaining your manuscripts, right? So when you submit your manuscript, in very, very basic terms, all the research that the journal is publishing has to be maintained on databases, on servers. From those servers, it needs to be distributed all over the world. And then, of course, they have their other costs like marketing cost, HR cost, whatever, right? So the journals have their own costs as well. It depends on how much are they spending on maintaining your research papers in their servers and their database. So there are two types of open access. One is gold, one is green. In the green open access, I'm not sure if I'm correct, but in one of these, I think in the green one, the author doesn't have to pay at all. The author doesn't have to pay for publishing at all, but the research will be released 3 to 6 months late. So there'll be an embargo. It doesn't immediately get published. If you want your research to be immediately published, you can put it under gold open access, but there will be a fee to pay for it. And just because it's open access doesn't mean it's not good quality. Nowadays, even many journals with very high impact factor have both open access and subscription options. So even with big journals like AORN journal or all the big journals nowadays, I can't remember the names, but for a lot of big journals, as authors, you have the option of submitting it in open access or in paid subscription, right? So if you submit it in the paid subscription, you don't have to pay. The person who's reading the journal, that person will pay. If you submit it in open access, again, in open access, if you submit in green open access, you don't have to pay at all. But if you submit under gold open access, you will have to pay some fee. But your article will get published fast. So this is how open access works. The most interesting thing about this is that the publisher, Elsevier, doesn't decide the fee. The fee is actually decided by the journal. So you will find that some journals are more expensive, some journals are less expensive. That's because the journal decides the fee that they want the author or the subscriber to pay. Elsevier doesn't decide it. So even the subscription fee, right? If Lancet charges $5,000 per year for subscription, that has been decided by Lancet, not by Elsevier. So publishers can't do anything about this. What publishers can do is to drive awareness, encourage you to use more open access if that is more economical for you, encourage you to use even more blogs or other more open journals like IEEE or PLOS One. If your institution supports those kind of journals, there's no harm in using those types of journals if cost is an issue or if you're worried about subscription fees. So I hope that addresses Mr. Tony's concern. There's some further comment here. Online access is very expensive and researchers need to be supported by an institution or apply for inclusion in their grant application. I noticed that open access journals will publish your papers quicker than the ones without fee. This point about open access publishing quicker, it really depends on where you're publishing. It depends on the journal. Some journals, so in the open access process, there is always a component of peer review. It's not that open access is not peer reviewed. Even open access journals are peer reviewed. It depends on how long the journal is taking to do that peer review. Some journals can do the peer review really fast. And that's why the paper gets published really fast. Other journals, even with open access, they take longer to do the peer review, and that's why it takes them time. But to answer your first part, online access is very expensive. You're right. A lot of times researchers build the cost of publication into the grant application. So that is an ongoing debate, but the institution rarely pays. It's very difficult to get the institution to sponsor it. Generally, it is best to build the publication fee into your grant application. That way, at least there's a paper trail of where the money is coming from, and there's a level of commitment that you will get the money. So generally, we find that researchers build the cost of publication into the grant application. Then it depends whether the grant application is going to the university or is it going to some external collaborator. That depends on you. You can even get external collaborators to fund the publication of your research. So that's where a lot of pharma and med device companies come in. They fund research and they don't mind that you include the cost of publishing into the funding. So you can consider those options. Many journals require data sharing. So we have to declare the data availability when we submit. Indeed. Is the sharing completely voluntary, or the refusal to share would influence the journal consideration? It will definitely influence journal consideration. So it is always a good practice to share all your data sources. If you are using publicly available data, publicly available databases, please list all your databases. Definitely. If you have purchased data from some source, please list that you've purchased the data, the source, the approvals that were required in the purchase process. Sometimes journals even ask for receipts. So keep the receipt. You don't have to submit the receipt to show proof of purchase, but sometimes journals do ask for proof of purchase as well. If you're collaborating with a hospital or if you're collaborating with another research organization to use their data, again, show the approvals and show the data sources. If you're not able to show exactly where your data is coming from, or even if it's an original experiment and you're not able to demonstrate that you've conducted the original experiment and then collected the data, it will definitely influence the journal's decision to publish or not publish your paper. So it's very important to show this data availability. So that's all about open access publishing in a nutshell. With open access publishing, there's nothing wrong with open access publishing. We strongly encourage you to explore open access options. Within open access, you have the option of publishing entirely for free, but that will delay the timeline, publication timeline, or you have the option of paying a little bit more and getting published faster. So those options are always there. Finally, how much fee you are required to pay depends on the journal. We cannot influence that. We cannot provide any discounts or any subsidies on that. It is entirely dependent on the journal, and the publisher cannot comment on that at all. So that's what the business model is for publishing. And then, as I mentioned, I just want to share some resources on how you can how ELSEVIER supports publishing. So we have a website called ELSEVIER for Authors. This is a free website. So you can all log into this website using this link. On this website, you'll find a few tools and resources. So on this website, you will find a step-by-step process, which is starting with finding the journal. So identifying the right journal, preparing your paper, which is basically writing the manuscript in line with the author guidelines, and then submission, tracking, and promoting your paper. So for each step, we have guidance on this platform. You can go through the guidance step by step, or as I mentioned, we have workshops coming up on each of these topics. So we'll cover it in the workshops as well. And you can submit your author via ELSEVIER to a journal. So you can either go to the journal website and submit your paper, or you can submit your paper. If it's an ELSEVIER journal, you can actually submit your paper through this website. The benefit of doing that is that you set up an Elsevier account, then all the submissions you make through this link, you can track them. So you can see where your paper is in the peer review process. A lot of times you can, if the editor of the journal allows, you can even interact with the editor and get feedback directly from them. So a lot of times we find that papers get rejected, but the researcher has no idea why the paper was rejected. But if you submit through the Elsevier link, we will try to make sure that you get the feedback from the editors on why your paper was rejected. So we can support you with your tracking if you use the Elsevier link to submit to Elsevier journals. Even at the find the journal stage, we have the journal finder. So again, on the same website, we have this tool. You can click on this link or you can click on this link. You can use this tool to identify your target journals, especially if you have a paper title or if you have your abstract ready. You can just enter, you don't have to enter the full title also. If you just have some keywords in mind or your research criteria in mind, you can just enter the data in the paper title and abstract, and the platform will give you a list of journals that align with your topic. And then you can filter the list based on the impact factor or the time to the turnaround time, the time to publication, or even whether the journal is open access or subscription journal. Based on that, you can filter the list. Sorry. So yeah, so as I was saying, you can use this link to identify journals that meet your topic of research. And then you can filter the list based on other criteria like impact factor, open access, time to publication, all those criteria you can use. So I would encourage you to refer to these links. And yeah, and then there are some additional resources here. So you can go through these slides as well. We've included some instructions here that you can look at, and some links that you can go through. So on basically on this Elsevier for Authors website, you will find a lot of links, instructions, and resources to get you started on the publication process. Our goal is to make that publication process easier for you. So from this website, you get a lot of information. You can submit your paper over here and we will help you track your paper. So those kind of support we can provide. At the end of the day, if you still decide to submit it directly to the journal website, that's fine too. But this is just one additional tool that we can provide to support you with the publication. So that's it. I'll leave all these slides in. You can go through these in detail. But at this point, I'll just come to the end of today's presentation. So I wanted to conclude by saying that I know publication is difficult. Publication is a complex and lengthy process, but true hard work never goes unnoticed. So you will see over here, this is a picture of an article that was actually published. The article is titled Origins of Magic, Review of Genetic and Epigenetic Effects. So this actually reminds you of Harry Potter, but basically in this paper, they're actually researching on the genetic and epigenetic factors that give you the ability to do magic. And the paper actually got published. So if this kind of research can get published, I am sure your hard work will definitely be recognized in the right forums. So with that, I'll conclude today's presentation. I know I skipped a few slides. I'll leave those in. And if you have any follow-up questions or if you want to discuss those slides one-on-one, we can set up a separate call.
Okay, in closing, I want to thank Natasha for giving us such an insightful workshop. I have to say, I really learned a lot about research and publishing. I'm so grateful for offering such a wonderful workshop. We apologize for some technical problem, I will assure all of you for the next workshop, it will be available in both Vietnamese and English. All the material that Tesha talked about today, the library will provide you a link to all those recording plus the PowerPoint. Once again, I thank you so much for your participation in today's workshop. I look forward to seeing all of you in the upcoming workshop next time. Thank you so much. Have a nice day. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Tasha. Thanks, Tony. Thanks, Tam.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll be online in case anyone has any questions, but if someone wants to drop off and eat lunch, please feel free to do so. Okay, Ms. Tam, I think most people are dropping off, so can we close the session now?
Yes, I think we can close it now.